I'd like to welcome the distinguished bipartisan panel that is conducting the review of the FBI's progress in addressing recommendations of the 9/11 Commission. They are former Attorney General Edwin Meese III, who was Chief of Staff in the Reagan administration and also the Attorney General, also former Congressman and Ambassador and 9/11 Commissioner, Congressman Romer, and also Professor Bruce Hoffman, Director of the Center for Security Studies at Georgetown University and a widely recognized expert on terrorism. Legislation to create this commission was first proposed in 2011 at the time of the 10-year anniversary of the 9/11 attacks and was signed into law last year as part of the FY 2013 omnibus. It will conduct an independent external review of the FBI's implementation of the recommendation from the 9/11 Commission, as well as consider how the Bureau is addressing the evolving threat of terrorism today. I believe this review is necessary and timely, especially as we mark a decade since the release of the 9/11 Commission recommendations this year. It's important that we continue to keep our eye on the evolving terrorist threat, especially given trends in domestic radicalization and the growth of al-Qaeda's affiliates in the Middle East and North Africa. I believe this commission will also be a great asset, as Director Comey acknowledged, to Director Comey as he starts his term as the FBI director. The men and women in the FBI have done an outstanding job preventing terrorist attacks over the last 13 years. And the committee and the American people are grateful to them. And I believe this review will ensure we're able to focus resources to continue to help them do this important work. I recognize that the panel is just beginning its efforts, so I expect this session to be one of laying out a roadmap rather than a presentation of findings. We look forward to hearing your plans. After you've given your statement, we will take members first. But first, I would like to recognize Mr. Fattah for any comments.
Well, I want to thank the chairman for holding this hearing because I think it's appropriate for us to take a minute and to pause and to hear from you about where we are in this process. So oftentimes we're just focused on the numbers, and but this is I think the commission did such an extraordinary public service that the least we can do is to follow up and to make sure that the recommendations are appropriately being acted on. So welcome, and we look forward to your testimony.
Thank you. You may proceed as you see appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, we have a joint statement, a formal statement, which has been provided, I believe, to the committee.
Yes, sir.
And thank you. Secondly, we each have a brief summary of that statement, which, if agreeable with the committee, will give and then be open to your questions.
That's fine.
Well, we appreciate this opportunity to appear there with my fellow commissioners, Ambassador Tim Romer and Professor Bruce Hoffman, to inform you of our progress and our plans to carry out the Commission's work as you have given it to us, and to speak about the specifically the response to the 9/11 Commission, what they have done, and then other things related to that. I think we, as you have mentioned earlier, have a very high regard for the FBI. In my own case, I have worked with them on a number of things over a period of 50 years. But like any law enforcement or intelligence agency, the FBI, while it labors every day to counter or mitigate a complicated array of threats, this is a dangerous world. At the same time, as Director Comey mentioned this morning, it is in fact a work in progress, and a great deal is happening in terms of the transformation from an investigative into an intelligence-led agency, and that is one of the principal areas in which we also will be conducting our work. As you know, this subcommittee was instrumental in establishing this commission on the review of the FBI in relation to counterterrorism, with 4 specific missions as stated. The objectives are, first, an assessment of the progress made and the challenges, as Mr. Fattah mentioned, in implementing the recommendations of the 9/11 Commission that are related to the FBI. Secondly, an analysis of the FBI's response to the trends of domestic terror attacks since the 11th of September 2001. Third, an assessment of any evidence now known to the FBI that was not considered by the 9/11 Commission related to any factors that contributed in any manner to the terrorist attacks of 9/11. And finally, any additional recommendations with regard to the FBI intelligence sharing and counterterrorism policy that have come to light either since that time or it may come to light in the course of our investigations. The congressional guidance constitutes, we believe, a broad mandate to provide a balanced assessment of the FBI's progress in its transformation in implementing the 9/11 Commission recommendations. But unlike the 9/11 Commission's mandate, which was much broader, ours is not a charge to investigate catastrophic terrorist attacks or major intelligence failures. Our work will involve an intensive examination of the Bureau's structure, organization, programs, and policies related to counterterrorism, intelligence, and cybersecurity since 9/11. We will render findings that commend what is working and point out where improvement is indicated. We will make every effort to recommend practical steps to improve performance. We are in the process of building a competent staff that, while relatively few in number, will be particularly rich in counterterrorism and intelligence experience, including people who have worked with the 9/11 Commission. We're developing a baseline of findings and recommendations from a number of multiple investigations, studies, assessments, and reports on the FBI's progress, some of them having been referred to earlier this morning, like the Webster Commission and other groups like that. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to build on what has already been done. We will assess the performance of the new programs since 9/11, including those related to homegrown violent terrorism, online radicalization, and the need to counter violent extremism. We will also be going to FBI training facilities to visit selective joint terrorism task forces around the country of various sizes, because there's considerable difference in terms of the programs and the availability of resources at the large, middle, and small counterterrorism locations. We specifically will be working through an intensive study on several terrorism cases, again, some of which were referred to earlier in your questions today, as giving us an opportunity to look at where the FBI was, what happened in those cases, what was successful, what was not successful, and where improvement is needed. We will also take a particular look at how closely and effectively the FBI is collaborating with other intelligence agencies and with strategic partners at the state and local levels and abroad. We will study the procedures in place to facilitate information sharing both within the United States and with international resources. And we feel this topic of information sharing will be a consistent theme as we process these case studies that I mentioned. I think, Mr. Chairman, that's my summary. I will turn to my colleagues and Ambassador Romer.
I think Bruce is going to go next.
Oh, okay.
For the,
Good.
assessment. Thank you, Chairman Wolf, Ranking Member Fatah, Mr. Culberson, and Mr. Schiff, for the opportunity to appear before you this morning with my fellow commissioners, Ambassador Tim Romer and former Attorney General Ed Meese. It is a pleasure to serve with them and an honor to work with the FBI on the important tasks that this subcommittee has laid out for our commission. As you know, I have dedicated my academic career, which now spans nearly 40 years, to the study of terrorism and more recently to the dynamics of radicalization, foreign and domestic, that can lead to violent extremism. This is a high priority national security issue that I know is of interest to you, as it is to the FBI. The FBI, indeed, is working hard today on programs related to homegrown violent extremism, online radicalization, and countering violent extremism. Let me share with you briefly some observations from my own academic study of radicalization. The variety of terrorists who have surfaced over the years evidences that there is no one path to radicalization. The reason why someone picks up a gun or blows themselves up are ineluctably personal, born variously of grievance and frustration, religious piety, or the desire for systemic socioeconomic change, irredentist conviction, or commitment to revolution. And yet, though there is no universal terrorist personality, nor has a single broadly applicable profile ever been produced, there are things that we do know. Terrorists are generally motivated by a profound sense of, albeit misguided, altruism. Deep feelings of self-defense, and if they are religiously observant or devout, an abiding, even unswerving commitment to their faith and the conviction that their violence is not only theologically justified, but divinely commanded. Theological arguments in this context are invoked both by the organizations responsible for the attacks and by the communities from which these terrorists are recruited. In the case of Muslims, although the Quran forbids both suicide and the infliction of wanton violence, pronouncements have been made by radical Muslim clerics and in some instances have been promulgated as fatwas, religious edicts, affirming the legitimacy of violence in defense of defenseless peoples and to resist the invasion of Muslim lands. Radical Islamist terrorist movements have thus created a recruitment and support mechanism of compelling theological incentives that sustain their violence campaigns and seeks vengeance, despite America's withdrawal from Iraq and impending departure from Afghanistan. Individuals will always be attracted to violence in different ways. Just look at the people who have gravitated towards terrorism in the United States in recent years. We have seen terrorists from South Asia and North as well as East African descent, as well as those hailing from the Middle East and the Caribbean. We have seen lifelong devout Muslims as well as recent converts, including one Philadelphia suburban housewife who touted her petite stature and blonde hair and blue eyes as being so atypical of the stereotypical terrorist so as to defy any efforts at profiling. Radicalized over the internet, she sought to use her self-described ability to avoid detection to assassinate a Swedish artist who drew an offensive cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad. These radicalized persons come from every walk of life, from marginalized people working in menial jobs, some with long criminal records or histories of juvenile delinquency, to persons from solidly middle and upper middle class backgrounds, with university and perhaps even graduate degrees, and prior passions for cars, sports, rock music, and other completely secular and material interests. Relationships formed at work, at school, on sports teams, and other recreational and religious activities, as well as over the internet, can prey upon the already susceptible. In some instances, first-generation sons and daughters of immigrants embrace an interpretation of their religion and heritage that is more political, more extreme, and more austere, and therefore demands greater personal sacrifices than that practiced by their parents. Indeed, the common element in the radicalization process reflects these individuals' deep commitment to their faith, often newly rediscovered, their admiration of terrorist movements or leading terrorist figures who they see as having struck a cathartic blow for their creed's enemies, wherever they are and whomever they might be, hatred of their adopted homes, especially if in the United States and the West, and a profoundly shared sense of alienation from their host countries. At the start of the war on terrorism a dozen years ago, the enemy was clear and plainly in sight. It was a large terrorist organization situated mostly in one geographic location, and it was led by an identifiable leader. Today, when the borders between domestic and international terrorism have blurred, when our adversaries are not only identifiable organizations, but enigmatic individuals, a complete rethinking of our counterterrorism policies and architecture is needed. We built an effective defense against the previous threat. Our challenge today is to develop new defenses against this new, more amorphous, diffuse, and individualized threat, while at the same time to continue to destroy and upend al-Qaeda, its affiliates and associates, and most especially the ideology that sustains them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. I would be happy to take any questions or comments you might have on radicalization or on subjects related to terrorism and the Commission's mandate following Ambassador Romer's presentation.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to begin by saluting and thanking my colleagues here. You can see why it's an honor to meet with and work with General Meese and Dr. Hoffman. I'm learning from them every day, and we've got great chemistry, and I think hopefully through the course of this commission we'll produce a product you're proud of. I'm delighted to be back up in Congress, Mr. Chairman, seeing Ranking Member Fatah and Mr. Culberson and Mr. Schiff, all friends of mine from before. It's great to see you doing your oversight work up here, and hopefully we'll be the recipient of friendly questions today. We look forward to issuing a report when we're finished with this. I would want to start, Mr. Chairman, by following Mr. Schiff and saluting you. I know that you have made a decision to retire from politics, something I voluntarily did a few years ago. You have made a significant difference, not just in Fairfax County and the United States, but around the globe, in carving out hard work and effective efforts on trafficking issues, religious freedom, and human rights. And I think your constituents in the country are proud of those efforts. So we all thank you for that hard work. I would ask, Mr. Chairman, that my formal statement be entered into the record, and I would just make some informal statements and comments. First of all, about my colleagues' comments, and then maybe a comment or two about Mr. Comey's very good presentation, and then talk for a minute or two about what makes commissions successful. As you've seen from the front page of the New York Times this morning, our intelligence community is talking about their concern about the extremists carving out new territory in Syria and potentially learning skills and tradecraft and training there and coming back to the United States. This is oxygen for al-Qaeda. Safe havens and possession of and access to territory in safe havens make them more effective and dangerous and deadly in the future. And as Mr. Comey said, I think this is an area where this commission can work with him as the new director of the FBI and look at what this threat might be for the world and for the United States and make recommendations accordingly. Second, in our testimony, Mr. Chairman, as you read through it carefully, we talk about 3 revolutions that have taken place over a series of the last several decades, one of them a technological revolution. While cell phones, Mr. Culberson, are opening up liberty and freedom and economic opportunity and elevating many people out of out of poverty in developing countries, we also see what they're doing to potentially radicalize on the internet through chat rooms and Inspire magazines, what they can do to shorten the fuse of radicalization for would-be terrorists. That's a challenge for the FBI. Is the FBI hiring the right people? Are they fast and innovative enough to keep pace and counter this threat around the world? Are they going to be able to compete with this flat, dynamic, and decentralized network of al-Qaeda? That's something that I think our commission will be looking at and making recommendations on. Mr. Chairman, you've, in your career, you've probably created many commissions. I've served on 4 commissions since I've left Congress. I highly recommend them for you that do leave Congress at some point. I've served on the 9/11 Commission. I've served on a commission on radicalization. I've served on a commission on the national parks and now the FBI. These commissions are created for many, many different reasons. As Mr. Fattah knows, there are commissions created for civil rights, higher education, assassinations, tragedies like the 9/11 attacks, some created by the executive branch, some by Congress, some much more effective than others in terms of their outcome and in getting the recommendations through Congress. A few things that probably made the 9/11 Commission particularly effective. One was the unity of purpose and unity of effort that we worked on together. We saw 2,977 human beings killed in a matter of hours, and that motivation, that attack by al-Qaeda, that devastation and death really motivated the 10 members of the Commission every day to work toward bipartisan solutions. Secondly, the American people were intimately involved in the public hearings, in tasking us and encouraging us to get to the bottom of things, to try to find out factually what went wrong, not to point fingers or blame games and politics, but to try to come up with sophisticated recommendations to reorganize our government and reform things so that we wouldn't make the same mistakes again, that we would better share intelligence across agencies, that we would fund new technology efforts like cybersecurity. Thirdly, I can't give enough credit to the 9/11 families who participated in the birth of the 9/11 Commission and how it got through Congress. It was a bill that John McCain and I worked on in the Senate and the House. We never would have gotten it through Congress if it hadn't been for the tenacity and the loyalty and the hard work and the love of those 9/11 families for their lost ones, children, family members. They worked tirelessly to try to make sure that something was done constructively about their losses. Another reason that the 9/11 Commission and other commissions succeed is about the clarity of the mission, the statutory mandate, so to speak. I think this committee, this staff, has given us a very clear mandate. It's broad, it's aggressive, but I think it's clear to us what we need to do over the next several months, and hopefully with your help and the FBI's cooperation, we're going to be able to get to the bottom of the facts and give you and the American people a good report. Another important issue is leadership. Leadership both on the Commission. We had leadership from Tom Kean, a Republican, and Lee Hamilton, a Democrat, where they wouldn't do a press conference apart from one another. There was no Democrat or Republican pride in authorship. They appeared together every time they did any kind of press so that they would be on message together. And that was a message to the 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans that politics should be put aside and facts and recommendations and success should be our ultimate mission and goal. Another area of huge cooperation for getting to your end mission is the cooperation of the agencies involved. The 9/11 Commission, ultimately, we had pretty good cooperation across the agencies to get access to documents and to get their support for briefings and follow-up, and that helped us within timelines to succeed at the end of the day. And finally, we had a talented staff, expert in a host of different areas that helped us on the 9/11 Commission. John Gannon, we've hired as our executive director, who has 30 years of experience in the intel community. We're in the process of trying to hire more staff, and that will be a key issue, I think, in terms of our long-term success. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I remember the lesson of my 5th grade Catholic school teacher. She taught us that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. We should use the 2 ears more than we use the 1 mouth. Just numerically, there's a lot more for us to learn in class than to speak in class. And as Ed and Bruce and I came up here, we want to get your collective wisdom as to what your concerns are about the FBI, where you'd like us to go within the mandate specifically, and we're honored and privileged to work with you in this effort to make America safer. So with that, I yield back the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman, and look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the testimony, and I supported the 9/11 Commission. There were a number of people from my district who died in the attack on the Pentagon, and I think the fact that the 3 of you, again bipartisan, is really important. And so, one, the subcommittee will do whatever you ask us to. And I was appreciative of Director Comey, both yesterday in a conversation I had with him and again today on the record. I think he is really open and enthusiastic about doing this, and I think that is very, very, very important. I don't have a lot of questions because I know you're in an early state. Can you just tell us, I mean, where is the staff, or how far along are you in getting kind of set up?
Of course, the most important part initially was getting John Gannon to be our executive director, and that has been a major step. He's working very hard with the FBI. There are a number of bureaucratic and you might say procedural steps in hiring federal employees, and so we have had some, let's say, inhibition perhaps in getting these staff members rapidly on board, and that's one thing we're working on very quickly here to get that accomplished. And I think that we trust that's being remedied at the present time. But that's the only I say inhibition that we've had so far. But other than that, we've had some excellent briefings already from FBI staff. We've talked to people on the outside, and so I think we're moving along, provided we can get over that particular hurdle.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just support my colleague in his answer. I think anytime you work with a big government organization, that cooperation is a work in progress. We hope to accelerate it. We hope to gain more flexibility in terms of our hiring procedures. We hope government across the board can be more flexible in this in the future, especially in the intel community. When you're fighting a foe like al-Qaeda that can be flat and dynamic and entrepreneurial, we need to be quick in terms of how we are proactive in those efforts. So we're hopeful.
The 9/11 Commission distinguished the recommendations between those that could be implemented through administrative action and those requiring statutory steps to implement. Will you be looking at both set of efforts?
Yes, we certainly will. And Professor Hoffman here is an expert and already has studied this as a part of his work at Georgetown. And so we have a pretty good fix on what has happened already in some of the work. And we will be looking at both the administrative and the things that might require legislation.
Roughly, do you have any idea of how many recommendations were made? And it could be the fault of the Congress, too, but how many recommendations were made by 9/11
Well,
in a percentage basis that were implemented, and how many recommendations were made that were never implemented?
Ambassador Romer probably is the best source as to how many were made.
Mr. Chairman, we take great pride in working with Congress and the White House on precisely the answer to your question. I believe about 41 recommendations were made by the 9/11 Commission. About 39 of those recommendations were enacted into law. As John Adams said, it's not just acting on legislation, it's executing and implementing them once they're passed. So there have been varying degrees of success on that implementation and execution, both by Congress and by the agencies. Of course, Mr. Chairman, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring it up in my old body of Congress. So one of the remaining recommendations has to do with Congress. It was the reorganization of the jurisdiction for Homeland Security, which is varied and spread out to about 100 different committees and subcommittees, and we recommend that be narrowed. That still has not been acted on, and we hope that at some point that can be.
Okay.
Bruce, you might want to add from your standpoint of studying these things for 10 years.
Nothing Ambassador Romer said at all.
Budget and travel, 1.5 million was appropriated in the FBI salaries and expenses for 13 and 14 to cover the cost. Could you provide this committee with some estimates of your various costs to include staffing, travel, and facility costs associated? I mean, is this enough? Because if we're going to be marking up relatively soon, we want to know if there's additional things that now that you're working on it that maybe we didn't think of that we should be doing. So you don't have to have an answer here, but if there's more, tell us within the next couple of weeks so we can make sure that we address them.
We'll do that.
Mr. Fattah?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me welcome you again. I guess the only thing, because you're at the beginning, but the thing that interests me is the big decision. The big decision after 9/11 was, because there was this tension about whether I kind of think about it like what we're doing with NASA. We got this commercialization process. You got some people who want to defend the old NASA, and you got others like myself who believe in the commercial competition of having different companies involved in space exploration. And the decision about whether or not we were going to have, given 9/11, the old FBI, chasing the bank robber, or whether the FBI was going to have to transform itself and to be the premier agency focused on preventing terrorist attacks, which wasn't about catching bad guys after they did things, but really about preventing these types of very severe attacks on Americans, right? Which would change the entire mindset of how the FBI had been constructed as a institution. And so now, as you heard from the director, we still have some of this tension between very important issues, human trafficking, white-collar crime, and so forth and so on. But at the front of the leaderboard for the agency in terms of what it's supposed to be doing is terrorism, right? And so you got this, so that this big decision is still kind of, in my mind, still kind of hanging out there about whether or not, you can serve as many masters or have as many priorities and be effective, right? So, on the airplane side, we said, look, we're going to create a whole new agency. It's TSA. Their only job is to make sure people don't get on planes and have an ability to take them over, right? I mean, that's really, and no matter whatever the inconvenience to people that take their shoes off, their belts, they can't take a bottle of water, they got, whatever the process is, that's that. But in this bigger space, the question of whether or not the first decision about whether or not the agency itself, the institution of the FBI, needed to be full throttle with one priority, or whether this multi-focus but terrorism at the front will work for the country, is something I'd love to hear you comment on.
I think maybe each of us might give our own views and in what I would call summary fashion, because, again, we're starting off. Bruce, why don't you start?
Okay. Well, the most important criteria, I think, is has the FBI kept us safe in the United States in the dozen-plus years since 9/11, certainly against a major terrorist attack, and I think the proof is in the pudding. I don't think in the dark days following the September 11th, 2001 attacks that anyone imagined that we would go this long without a major terrorist attack.
Well, you could take that logic and say that prior to 9/11 it had done the same, right? So the real question is because there are many of my colleagues, the Fort Hood incident and others, who point to different circumstances. My real question is just about whether or not, and I'm saying there's no way to know which is the right way to go, but just this question about the agency itself, which is you're going to be looking at, and whether or not multiple priorities that span a range of items, or just this principal issue, whether that first decision was something that you should look at again.
Right. No, I understand, and you raise very good points. I mean, my response was only to say that I think that the FBI has changed enormously, that it has adopted a much more intelligence-driven approach, and that I think the problem is that the types of threats that we face are constantly changing and evolving. So an FBI that's very good at preventing a very big terrorist attack from a 9/11 stature or from a terrorist organization, we can see how the threat now has devolved to a lone individual like Nidal Hasan, successful incident that unfortunately was not prevented, or the Boston Marathon bombing. You've got two idiot teenagers, to put it frankly, who were on their radar, at least the older brother was on their radar, but then for some reason fell from their radar. And I think that's one of the things we want to look at is both study the successes and the lessons learned from the successes, but study the work in progress or some of the problems that have occurred and identify them and help the FBI to remedy them. I think, and I was involved in this debate as well a decade ago, is whether we needed an American MI5, a security service. I think we went in the right direction by preserving the FBI's structure and by taking at his word. And I think Director Mueller did do a lot to transform the agency. I think it's an incomplete transformation, as it has to be, because, as I said a moment ago, the threat is constantly changing and evolving. And I think one of the challenges is to make sure, as I think we heard from Director Comey, that the FBI is well positioned to respond to those trends, to take advantage of new technologies and new approaches to stay ahead of the bad guys. But I think one of the FBI's strengths has always been its investigative powers. They're now, I think, their intelligence capabilities are being built up. Hopefully that eventually it will be at the same level.
This is the great big question that you ask, and we had weeks, if not months, of debate on this on the 9/11 Commission. we had three choices. Do you recommend that the FBI can fiddle around the edges and fix itself from the errors or mistakes or challenges pre-9/11 and post-9/11? That was one choice. Secondly, would we go outside the box and recommend the creation of an MI5, which would remove that capacity directly out of the FBI and put it someplace else? Thirdly, would we make a recommendation that was somewhere in the middle and recommended to the FBI that they create a National Security Bureau with a path for analysts and intel-driven expectations within the Bureau? We decided to go on the third option, and Mr. Fattah, to your very good question, it is a work in progress. The FBI has cultural barriers, bureaucratic barriers, rule barriers that sometimes make this a difficult transition for them. At the same time, I think all of us have to get to the second part of your question, and that is, as they're making this transformation to a intel-driven a national security agency to protect the United States and its people against terrorism, they have to be able to do other things. They must be able to go after the counterintelligence, cyber threats. They must be able to go after people who violate civil rights and civil liberties. That history for the United States of America is very important, and that mission is key. White-collar crime. They have to be able to help protect our cities. And so some of this is mutually beneficial, and some of it is going to be a big challenge for the FBI to get to.
Mr. Fattah, I think I agree. It's an excellent question, and one which we are considering as a commission. Not the decision has been made, and quite frankly, I personally agreed with it at the time. But how that's implemented is going to be one of our major concerns and major areas of inquiry. Let me say, though, I think we recognize in terms of this that the FBI has the resources, they have the field operation structure, they have the long history of excellent investigation, the kinds of resources you really need for something like this. Also, they have an ongoing relationship with state and local law enforcement, which is a valuable asset for them that no other agency could really approach. And this is already, these joint terrorist task forces have shown that this provides the best way to bring together through the FBI the information that's so valuable from a lot of sources within the United States. But they also have the connections overseas. The LEGATs are better than any other agency in the government of working with the police forces of the various states, nations around the country. There's another thing about the FBI, and that is they've long existed and carried on their activities, particularly in the last couple of decades, with an appreciation and an allegiance to the constitutional rights of people. And this also, as you pursue these kinds of investigations, is an important aspect. And so it's basically their ability to transform the organization into an intelligence-led investigative agency, which we will be looking at very closely.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And I think a lot of credit goes to Director Mueller, too. Go ahead, Mr.
Absolutely. Director Mueller was terrific in this, and I just want to thank each one of you for serving this in this vitally important commission. Thank you, Chairman Wolf, for putting this in the bill. And General Meese, what a privilege to have you with us in your time as Attorney General. In the decades you've seen the FBI evolve. I wanted to ask you to take a minute to each one of you talk a little bit about that critical change in the fundamental culture of the FBI from obviously they've got to continue to, as law enforcement officers, be sure they're protecting the constitutional rights of those people that they're investigating, but this intelligence aspect, change in culture that you just mentioned, General Meese, I just want to explore that a little more. Talk to us about the how from what you've seen so far in your initial inquiries, the FBI has been able to adapt, integrate that intelligence gathering capability with their traditional mission of strictly as a law enforcement entity looking to preserve evidence that would succeed in a prosecution in court. They're different missions, and how do you see them overlapping and adapting so far?
Well, I think each of us will present our own views on it. In my own case, I think they've done they have made a very good start, let's say, in a transformation of, as you point out, a very different culture, from getting evidence that will be acceptable in court to having investigations and having an investigative sense of going beyond what the evidence in court is and to what the significance is of what they're learning, and to have the imagination and the broader picture which is necessary for intelligence work. And I think they've made a start of this. One evidence of that is the fact that they've already started, and I say that advisedly, in raising the importance of analysts who are not FBI agents. And there's still a long ways to go, I think, in changing the culture where agents did the hard work and support people did a lesser magnitude of work. We realize that intelligence analysts, in many ways, are as important as agents in getting the big picture of intelligence. And so, but the fact is that structurally, they're changing the role of intelligence analysts. They're certainly changing the number. It's a much higher percentage of the force than ever before. So I think that that is something in which certainly Director Comey is very interested in following personally, and the way in which he has interacted with the structural changes, organizational changes in the FBI, the creation of the National Security Bureau at the highest level, the attention given to the Counterterrorism Division, to the Directorate of Intelligence. I think these are all signs that there is a commitment at the level of the director and below that.
Yes, sir.
But any change in culture always is going to take time.
Always difficult.
Bruce, you want to?
Well, you know, we're still at very early days. We've only started briefings in the past few weeks from the FBI, but I have to say personally, I've been extremely impressed by the intelligence analysts who have participated in those briefings, who really, I think, are outstanding individuals, some of the best in the entire intelligence community. Now, whether there aren't issues such as you described, sir, you know, about acculturalization and integration that we're not going to find in our investigations, I can't say, but thus far, some of the people there have been extraordinarily impressive. To go to your question, too, about sort of the FBI as an intelligence versus a security service, one of the problems in the United Kingdom with MI5 is that not all the surveillance they do is necessarily admissible in court. And this is very different for the FBI. I mean, their investigations are done so rigorously that lead to prosecution, which is a big advantage.
Exactly what I was driving at.
The other thing, I think, in the United Kingdom is, firstly, there's only 52, I think, or 50-plus constabularies, whereas there's 18,000 jurisdictions here, so it's little apples and oranges. But I think the real key is many of those constabularies have special branch, which is to say like an intelligence division. Mm-hmm. That's one of the challenges in the United States. I mean, NYPD, of course, as we heard earlier, in Director Comey's discussion, has an excellent intelligence unit. Los Angeles, for instance, certainly has an excellent intelligence unit, but not every police department in this country has an intelligence unit, and that's often who MI5 works very closely with, the special branch. So you can see why the transition to have gone purely to an intelligence agency probably wouldn't have really even suited the United States, even if it was desirable. And in that respect, I think where we're really looking very hard is at the integration of the intelligence analysts, the people who aren't special agents, what their place in the FBI is. And Director Comey has certainly made a very firm commitment to ensuring that they have an active role. But
it's a brand
this is
new
what
mission.
We're looking at.
I would say, Congressman, to your point, a few follow-ups. One, now that the FBI has been asked to create this National Security Bureau, and we have already been briefed, we've probably had a half dozen to a dozen different briefings by very, very talented and exceptional people. Are they the exception to the rule, or is this National Security Bureau being pushed down from Mr. Mueller and Mr. Comey, and there are career paths for people successful career paths on the analytical side. That will be something that we're going to be looking at very carefully. Secondly, one of the metrics that we'll probably be analyzing and evaluating is we often hear from the FBI special agents. They will look at clues and they will look at cases and try to determine, is there a prosecution in this case? Can we put somebody in jail as a result of this case? The analysts are asking an entirely different question. The analysts should be asking questions, is this, to Mr. Chairman's point, is this person in the process of radicalizing? Are they radicalizing others? Are they trying to radicalize through the internet? How do we follow them? What intelligence do we gather for broader strategic strategy to understand what's going on and gather against even more people to understand the threat abroad or in the United States? So I think that's going to be very important. Thirdly, you've mentioned a couple cases this morning, and I think Ed and Bruce and I will be looking at these cases, the Zazi case in New York and the subway bombing, the Fort Hood case with Hassan. How did the JTTFs that generally work well together and share information, did they work well in all these cases? Preliminarily, we see that they may have worked well together in the Zazi case, but not worked as closely together and shared information in the Fort Hood case. Why is that? How do we try to ensure better, consistent efforts between the JTTFs? So these are some of the things that we'll be looking at, and we'll probably be looking at these on some key case-by-case methodologies.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I have a follow-up, if I could, afterwards, when you finish particularly with General Meese, to talk about the privacy rights of individual Americans and after you finish with yours, sir. Thank you.
Okay, I just have a few last. Are you going to meet with Director Mueller and Associate Director Joyce?
We will, yes.
Okay, I think that's a good idea. One of the key elements to look at the threat of domestic radicalization, according to Congressional Research Service, there have been 74 homegrown jihadist plots in the U.S. since 9/11, and 53 have occurred in the last 5 years alone, including the Fort Hood, Times Square, and the Boston Marathon. How will the Commission be studying this threat, and do you have any initial thoughts or comments on this trend? That's the first question, and then, I'll just end. I'll come to the second. Do you have any thoughts? Or
Bruce, do you want to go first on that? Your testimony covered that.
Well, I mean, this goes back to my point about how the threat's so rapidly evolving and changing. I think, common sense dictates that may just be the tip of the iceberg, given what's going on in Syria and your excellent work, I think, in focusing attention on Americans going to Syria. I mean, this has become, I think, an enormous issue. It's firstly a much bigger rallying cry that even Afghanistan was in the 1980s. It's not geographically as distant as Afghanistan is. It's much easier to get to Syria. You actually can fly into NATO allies and just cross Europe to get there. Syria is in the heart of the Middle East and of the Arab world. It's viewed by al-Qaeda but other groups as sacred Islamic territory. And what I think is so consequential is it's in Syria we're seeing this transition from top-down driven propaganda, websites and spy or magazines, being now matched by social media, Twitter accounts, Facebook, WhatsApp. I mean, some things that I've never heard of or that my kids use is very common. And this is being used to radicalize and recruit. And I think it has an enormously worrisome potential, because now you've got, much like Anwar al-Awlaki, he was so effective because he could communicate with people in their own vernacular. He was born in the United States, then came back to the United States, went to university, lived here, could communicate very effectively in English using all the slang and argot. And that's what we're seeing from, at least thus far, British jihadis who have gone off to Syria, who are using, I mean, I follow them on Twitter, so obviously the FBI is probably following me as well, but on Twitter you see on a daily basis guys with, literally thousands of followers. There's one jihadi who has 24,000 followers, but it's typical to have anywhere between 1,000 and 4,000 followers. They're posting photographs of morning physical training. They post photographs of one another eating together, of praying together, and they're directing messages to others in the Western world saying, come on, it's easy. Here's how we got here. This is what you can find. Here's what our lives are like. You can see they're good. We're making this sacrifice. You're staying behind and not participating. And on an individual level, we're going to see, I think, an explosion in this radicalization and recruitment. And that's exactly one of the things we're looking at and working with the FBI. We've had briefings from the FBI, for instance, on internet radicalizations and engaged in them in discussions. Well, what about the next thing over the horizon, which is the social media, which they're gearing up to respond to, and we hope to be able to assist in that.
This is an excellent question as well. Bruce, I think, covered in his testimony how interesting people like al-Awlaki are. Here's somebody that was somehow meeting with some of the terrorists back in 9/11. We're not still sure exactly what role he played and whether he was a co-conspirator or whether he was just meeting on the margins with Hazmi and Midhar. He then ends up getting involved in jihadi practices and going to teach that over in the United Kingdom. He comes back I believe he goes back over to Yemen then and starts radicalizing people on the internet and in chat rooms. 4 of the 5 successful post-9/11 attacks taken on by lone wolves are inspired by al-Awlaki. He dies by a drone attack and then still inspires attacks from the grave. The interesting question is not only understanding how he is able to radicalize people, but what is the FBI doing to understand that threat? Who are they hiring? Are they getting access to the best and the brightest to bring in people who can anticipate where al-Qaeda and terrorist groups go with these kinds of technologies in the future? As Mr. Comey said in his testimony a couple hours ago, are they able to have the resources from Congress to train people and educate people to this threat? Are they bringing in people from MIT? I think, Mr. Chairman, you talked about DARPA and MIT and getting the best minds together in the United States to understand where these people are coming from. I remember on the 9/11 Commission, Tom Clancy had written a novel before 9/11 about an airplane that was going to crash into the United States Capitol. We need to make sure that our folks at the CIA and the FBI are red teaming, are thinking 10 years ahead of the terrorists, are hiring the people that help us think ahead of them, and have organizations that are not bureaucratic and hierarchical, but flat and entrepreneurial and dynamic that can stay ahead of this.
My colleagues have said it very well. I just add one thing, that is the fact that we've had 53 cases of threats in the last 5 years indicates that the threat of terrorism continues. There was a feeling, particularly when bin Laden was killed, that somehow terrorism was no longer as great a threat. And as we've seen, it does continue to be a very serious threat to us. And the onset of homegrown radicalization, if anything, has continued to grow in this country. So I think the main lesson we have to learn from that as a nation is that you cannot allow your guard to be let down, and that you have to be very cognizant of what a real threat this is and continues to be. One of the things that has happened, of course, on an international basis is the fact that al-Qaeda, for example, which was pretty centralized at one time. And as we know, if you have a centralized enemy, it's a lot easier to fight than a decentralized enemy. And today we have a decentralized enemy internationally, as well as a decentralized terrorist threat within our own country. So if anything, the type of work the FBI is doing is more important today, perhaps, or certainly as important as it was before 9/11.
Well, I'm going to end and go to Mr. Culberson, but I have a whole series of questions, but I think you really kind of covered. I was going to ask you about the internet, the radicalization. I'm really glad that you're looking at this and that you're there. You just triggered al-Shabaab. All the Bureau tells us that, and there have been enough American citizens that have been killed in Somalia. They were all Somalians who returned to Somalia. But when I asked some of the people in the Bureau on those who have gone to Syria, and there may be an exception, almost none of them are Syrians who are going to Syria. They're all from other places. And I think the FBI is so busy doing these things, I think to have the three of you kind of reflecting on these and thinking, if there are any we mark up relatively soon, but if on the interim, just pick up the phone and say, we think preliminary at this time, if you were to do this, let us know, just the same way we were with Director Comey. If he has something, obviously we're not going to break the budget. If there's anybody here from OMB, we're not going to be looking at, but if there's something that we can shift around or do, because the guy at OMB is looking at it from a green-eyed shade to thinking, if we can say, we'll take something here and put it there and do it. So if you have any ideas between now and next month, call us on the phone and tell us. I'm going to just end by, I am very, very grateful that the three of you were willing to do that. It's bipartisan. Frankly, I don't think you can have three better people, to kind of look at this from an experience point of view. So, and I'm kind of interested, I probably shouldn't say this, but the media didn't even pick you guys up for the longest period of time. It was like, and fresh eyes on the target, to always come and take with fresh eyes. And lastly, I don't know if there's anybody here from the FBI, but I appreciate the fact that Director Comey's been very open, as Bob Mueller has always been, really open to say, hey, we want this done. And so I want to thank the director for sort of having this open attitude, and thank the three of you for your service. And with that, I'll just end for me, and you can go, Mr.
If I could, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, personally, want to thank you all for the extraordinary service that you're already rendered to the country and that you're willing to do through this commission. And with your permission, Mr. Chairman, because we've got just a little bit of time here, and I don't want to go too long, but if I could, I hope that you will keep in the forefront of your mind as you go forward, and Mr. Chairman, I hope this is agreeable with you, remember Ben Franklin's admonition that you don't want to, those who would trade a little freedom for a little safety are going to wind up with neither. And it's a real source of concern for me, as I know it is for you, Mr. Chairman, and all of us as Americans, that the importance of identifying who our enemy is, we've got to be very careful we're protecting the privacy of individual Americans that has really never been surrendered from the beginning of the nation. And General Meese, when you said, we're facing a decentralized enemy in an era where the internet, you can't even take the battery out of this thing and turn it off, and it's ubiquitous. I'm delighted to hear the FBI director doesn't even use one. It gives you an idea how dangerous these things are. But as you go forward and you look at this, I hope you'll keep that in the forefront of your mind in the efforts of the FBI to gather intelligence on who the enemy is. But at the same time, how do we, I hope, just talk to us if you could a little bit during this time that we've got together here today. Help guide us as policymakers and keep it in the forefront of your mind, is how do we, in this whole new era of incredible access to information and invasion, and we know, Mr. Chairman, that the FBI has told us that the Chinese are able to actually turn on cameras remotely and watch and hear everything that you're doing. How do we protect the individual privacy rights of Americans and who are law-abiding Americans? For example, Dr. Hoffman, you say you follow this guy, some nutcase on Twitter to see what he's up to. I mean, does the FBI then have the right to come in and invade your privacy? Does any government entity have the right to come in and, as they did with Frank, they broke into your computer. They literally, the Communist Chinese government broke into this good man's computer, your official computer, right? Sucked it dry because he was helping Chinese dissidents, I believe, wasn't it, Mr. Chairman? And stripped it, and then I think actually put a virus or something on there, didn't they? Does the government have that right, Dr. Hoffman? I mean, how do you, and you've got a professional interest, and I'm not too worried about you from coming in and getting a terrorist act against the United States, but what does that do to you and your privacy rights?
Well, I think as long as no laws are being broken, which they haven't been, but this goes back to
but you've knocked on the guy's door. Basically, you knocked on this guy's door and accessed him.
But of course, it's completely open because I'm listed as his followers.
Yeah.
So there's no secret.
Does the FBI then have the right to go in and search your computers and see what you're doing?
I don't think they have a right to go in and search my computers, but I certainly hope they're monitoring the fact that I'm monitoring them and at least trying to figure out, am I someone who should be of interest to them or not? And I think that we, count on, and this is why I think having an agency that's not strictly an intelligence agency that is very conscious of privacy rights and of constitutional rights is extremely important.
Well, I'd suggest it's not just that the agency's conscious of it, but that I hope you'll also think as a part of your recommendations in your work is what can we do as policymakers to ensure that Americans are keenly aware of when they, for example, if you communicate by an email with somebody like this, that I think of it in terms of consent. That because whenever you download a new program or access any kind of an update, you get that consent thing. I hereby agree to all the terms and conditions. I think one way to deal with it might be just to make sure that in the event that you're communicating with, accessing, one of these vile websites that Frank was talking about earlier, frankly, I think the FBI ought to just infect the guy's computer and fry it up. But at a minimum, you ought to be able to, there's some notice that I just want you to know that you're accessing a website, you're talking to somebody that's being monitored by the federal government, and this, is there a way perhaps?
Well, I think we're constantly given the devolution of the threat and its individualization, as I think the U.S. government and its agencies are constantly finding and striving to strike a balance between the two. But the Hassan case that we talked about earlier is precisely one in point, because the FBI was very reluctant to intervene very aggressively because they thought that initially he was only soliciting Anwar al-Awlaki's views on theological arguments.
Well, and it was also political correctness on the part of the Army, as the chairman said.
But I think this is why these things, my personal view, and that's all it is that I think we have to look to those who protect and defend us, that hopefully they are watching and monitoring these things, and then making a determination if there's both a genuine and a legal threat that then triggers additional investigation.
This is a general discussion because it's difficult. This is brand new. This is the 21st century, something we've never seen before. And in my mind, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it correct that there are certain individual liberties and rights that were never surrendered to any level of government? And I always think of the example I gave earlier of, for example, Patrick Henry and the founders never surrendered. Is it accurate to say, General Meese, that from my reading of the Constitution, the Revolutionary War era, the whole intent of the Constitution to preserve our liberty, provide for the common defense and the general welfare is to fundamentally the federal government was created to protect our liberty, and the correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it? My reading is Patrick Henry and the founders never surrendered, for example, the right of self-defense. That's accurate, isn't it? To any level of government.
Well, that's true, and that's reflected in our laws. As a matter of fact, the Constitution itself was designed to be a protection against the invasion of people's liberties, and that was one of the major concerns of the founders.
Right.
And in the 1787 when they conceived, and the anti-federalists were concerned about the fact that this might be giving up our liberties to the central government. That's why they were concerned about the central government.
George Mason refused to sign the Constitution, right, I believe, for that reason.
But I would say if you look at what the government's doing today in terms of intrusion in people's lives, it's not coming from the law enforcement communities.
Yeah, it's as a part of your thought process, I hope as you go forward you'll think about this and recommend to us what we can do to help ensure that we're protecting those fundamental liberties and right to privacy that all Americans
I think that'll be a concern that all of us on this commission certainly have.
Congressman, if I could, you've been eloquent in your quotations. One of my favorite quotations is from Abraham Lincoln, and paraphrasing him, he talked about we will never be destroyed from an enemy on the outside. The only way we will destroy America would be by removing freedoms and liberties from ourselves. And we must protect those constitutional rights and freedoms. And I think that's something that Bruce and Ed and I will ask in our briefings, and we do ask. How does the FBI continue to stay, on the right side of the First Amendment and the Constitution, but also be aggressive in going after terrorists? We've mentioned the Zazi case to you several times. There's an intelligence bureau up in New York City with the NYPD that has negotiated, according to the book, Enemies Within, some different rules where they can, be a little bit more aggressive in going after suspects and looking into cases. The FBI assures us that they stay within the Constitution and within the First Amendment when they're doing these investigations.
You'll confirm that.
We will keep asking those questions. I would say, though, Congressman, that we talked about this on the 9/11 Commission. Congress has the opportunity in your oversight now to look at the NSA issue and the mega data collection issues, the drone policy, and eavesdropping and other things. It's much better for Congress to debate these issues with clarity, with due diligence, hopefully in a bipartisan way, and get it right, rather than waiting for the next terrorist attack.
So
and then
true.
we stampede toward ill-thought-through laws that may not balance our Constitution.
That's why I'm
and our
asking
freedom
these
and
broad,
liberties.
open-ended questions, and appreciate it, because you're perfectly positioned to help guide us in that effort as we go forward, because it's so vital. And I think also to remember, as you said, General Meese, that we're facing a decentralized enemy. Our greatest strength as a nation is that not only is our individual right to privacy decentralized, but frankly, we just trust the good judgment of individual Americans who never gave up the right of self-defense, who never surrendered the right of freedom of thought or religion, or so many of these fundamental freedoms. Frankly, my memory is that most of these terrorist attacks, for example, the one in Kentucky, so many FBI has certainly spotted people on the internet, but it's been local police officers and individual Americans that have stopped a lot of this. The passengers on United Flight 93, but for their individual initiative and courage, the Capitol building would not be here. It would have been a smoking ruin.
We've got a lot to be grateful for to
We
those
do. And I
patriots.
hope you'll remember, and as the report, as you put it together, talk to us, guide us, advise us on what we can do as policymakers to make sure that we're doing all that we can, not only to help the FBI do their job, but also to protect and reinforce and reaffirm our faith in the individual good judgment of average Americans to do the right thing for the right reasons of protecting themselves and their families and their communities and their states, because that's our greatest strength. That's the one way. The enemy will never crack that. As long as we have faith in the good judgment of individual Americans to protect themselves and their freedoms, they'll never conquer us.
That will certainly be an important consideration that we will give to our work, and also to the fact that the most important thing really is making sure that the public gets the truth about what's going on.
Absolutely.
And this with the transparency and that sort of thing. And I've been very much impressed with Director Comey, and but we will certainly be very cognizant of that as a major
Thank you.
goal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to be so broad about that. I was thinking a terrorist is a lot less likely to attack Texas than he is perhaps other places, because he won't last long.
Mr. Chairman, if I may just thank you and your committee for creating this commission. I have 4 children. One of them's 13, Grace, and she goes to school in your district. She was born right before 9/11. And you all passionately talk about 9/11. You talk about it like it happened yesterday, but we have a lot of constituents throughout the country that don't remember it quite so well. We heard a comment from a congressman the other day that said 9/11 is a little bit like Gettysburg. It happened a long time ago, and some people tragically are forgetting about it. I think this committee's hard work to put this commission to work, to try to make sure that the American people don't forget, never forget about the 2,977 people that died on 9/11, that it never happen again, that our agencies keep changing, keep reforming and transforming. We're very grateful to you for putting us to work, and we're going to need your help in the months ahead to do it the right way.
I'd like to join in thanking the committee, and also particularly thanking the chairman for his tremendous leadership in the Congress and the causes that you have taken under your wing and brought to the attention of the public, brought to the attention of this body, the Congress, and all that you've done for human rights, for civil rights, and for the betterment of the country as a whole. I think this, being kind of a champion of this whole issue of taking a look at the FBI, making sure that they're doing the best to protect the country, is an example of your interest, and where you put your personal energies and your personal position on the line to make sure that things are being done properly. And so I just want to join in thanking you for your service and appreciate very much being one of your constituents particularly. I'm very grateful to you.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you all. I thank the commission. Let us know if anything we have to do, and with that, thank you.
Thank you.
Kate Hunter covers the Senate for Bloomberg.